Have you ever wondered whether a dog food can have too much protein? I mean, you might have encountered that if you have changed dog foods, maybe your dog doesn't agree with the new food and you are wondering whether it could be too much protein. So in this video, I am going to address whether there is such a thing as too much protein, and I'm going to explain from a nutritional standpoint why protein is absolutely essential to your dog's diet. Hello, my name is Sam. I'm a dog and cat nutritionist and proud owner of a chain of independent pet shops where we exclusively focus on nutrition. Now, there are three main macronutrients. We have carbohydrates, proteins and fats, and those are the three macronutrients everyone needs in order to survive. Now, when it comes to protein, the body doesn't have an ability to actually store protein. Protein is either consumed or oxidized by the body. I mean, if you eat excess protein, can it be converted to fat? Can it be stored in adipose tissue, in fat? Well, when we look at studies, isotopic labeling studies they're called, if you overconsume protein, do those carbons end up in adipose tissue? Well, it's a weeny tiny bit. It's almost negligible. Almost all the dietary fat comes from fat. So yes, fat does get stored as fat, but not protein. Your body or your dog's body either consumes protein or oxidizes protein. Your dog doesn't have the ability to retain the protein and store it as fat. Protein is arguably the most important macronutrient of them all. Protein has a thermogenic effect. It's called TEF, the thermic effect of food. This means that it takes a lot more for the body to be able to break down the protein and to be able to utilize the protein. That's why you will be burning more calories if you have a protein-rich diet. We actually have had many studies showing that high protein diets contribute to building more muscle and encouraging muscle protein synthesis, which is absolutely crucial for dogs as well. Now, foods higher in protein are also very high in satiety. So if your dog is hungry all the time, it could actually be that the food you're providing them with is not high in protein enough. So they aren't being satiated enough. Now, there's a lot of confusion when it comes to proteins and carbohydrates in dog food. Now, it does depend on the source of protein you're providing your dog with. Now, vegetable proteins, some vegetable proteins, for example, or plant-based proteins, usually require way more protein from them, a lot more quantity from them, in order to get the same response as those compared with animal-based proteins. So you would need a lot more lentils, for example, or a lot more potatoes to derive protein from those than you would need from chicken. And by the way, if you are curious about knowing what the best dog food is, you can try a free guide. You can click in the link below and that will take you to the 10 pillars of dog health, how to feed your dog better. That guide will include most things you need to know when it comes to nutrition and how to feed your dog better. Click in the link below, it's free and it's absolutely incredible. So vegetables or grains or things like wheat, for example, have a much lower leucine amount, and leucine is the most important amino acid when it comes to muscle protein synthesis. So if you're thinking about proteins, protein preferably needs to come from an animal like chicken or beef or reindeer or mackerel, for example, as opposed to wheat or barley. So for example, you would need a massive amount of wheat or peas or things like that in order to get the same protein that you would from chicken or beef, for example. That's why we always recommend you read the ingredients on the back of every single thing you give your dog. And if you see wheat, barley, corn, soy, and things like that, it is very likely that those ingredients will be very, very high because they will need a lot more from them in order to get enough protein to serve your dog. Whereas if they were more meat heavy, they would be a lot better off. Now, protein, once again, has a much higher thermic effect of food than carbohydrates or fats. That's why it's so important that you prioritize feeding animal proteins to your dog. One of the most common pushbacks that people do make is the correlation between high protein diets and chronic kidney disease. And over the last 3 decades, quite a few randomized controlled trials that have been peer reviewed have come out looking at protein intake, showing pretty clearly, pretty decisively, that it does not harm a healthy kidney. In fact, a recent systematic review of meta-analyses, so the big daddy of all randomized controlled trials, show that protein doesn't harm a healthy kidney, and this is pretty consistent with the literature. This is because if you prioritize protein, you are going to probably have a much healthier diet than someone else who prioritizes high amounts of carbohydrates or high amounts of dietary fat. I mean, another obvious thing is that dogs are more meat eaters than anything else. So it does make sense to give them more protein than anything else, and more meat than anything else. I mean, just because dogs can digest a little bit of wheat or a little bit of potato or a little bit of rice, it doesn't mean that you should try to give them high amounts of wheat, high amounts of protein or potato protein, for example, that is going to be a lot less bioavailable, a lot less nutritious, a lot less absorbable to their bodies than, say, chicken, beef, or any other meat. If the body doesn't have the ability to store protein, if the body doesn't have the ability to transform that protein into fat, what can it be if a food is too rich for your dog? Well, maybe your dog is intolerant to a particular food or a particular protein. If your dog is reactive to chicken, for example, then maybe your dog is going to get the runs, or maybe that food is not going to agree with your dog. But you should always check for as much protein content. You should always aim for as much protein as you can for your dog, because you want to be paying for meat. You don't want to be paying for wheat gluten, and you don't want to be paying for rice in pet food. So if your dog doesn't agree with a particular protein, what you can do is change protein. If your dog doesn't agree with chicken or beef or pork, there are many other proteins. Kangaroo, goat, you can try quail, you can try any other exotic meat than you can find, and your dog will probably be a lot better off. Try to avoid any fillers. Try to avoid things like animal derivatives, natural flavors, or sugar derivatives. And those, in our experience, tend to be the most common offenders when it comes to dietary problems and health issues with our dogs. So I wouldn't say that your dog doesn't agree with too much protein. There isn't such a thing as too much protein. Whether your dog agrees with the food or not, that's a different thing. But there isn't such a thing as too much protein. The body either consumes protein or oxidizes the protein. It doesn't do anything else.